thank first of all everyone for coming and showing their support. Just as people come in, maybe just direct them that they may come through quietly as we're speaking. This actually planned this event for. It's actually the night after the Shloshim. This morning and afternoon was the Shloshim for my dear father-in-law, Shalom Yosef Chaim Alter ben Nissel Meir. The reason was because in Passaic, New Jersey, and in Baltimore, Maryland, branches of our family have gathered. We're going to be gathering for a Shloshim event, and they are actually making a Siyum on Shishay Sidrei Mishnah. It was going to be happening on Tuesday, and then we would get the video after the event and show it here tonight. But what they call a nor'easter, a blizzard of proportions, I don't know if you've been following the news, has gripped the United States of America on the eastern seaboard. So they actually had to have their event also today on Wednesday. So there was also a siyum in Yerushalayim with my own family, my son Yehuda and my son-in-law Yitzchak. We had siyumim and Yitzchak made on Septus and Megillah, and Yehuda made on a Seder Noshim of Shnayos. So much Torah and much honor has been done to my father-in-law, which he deserves so greatly. The circumstances of my parents' end of life, as it were. My mother-in-law's sudden passing, and then the 6-month period my father-in-law was in the hospital, in and out, basically, mostly in, were dramatic and heartrending. But on the other hand, in terms of my father-in-law, he actually lived on for 6 months, except for the first few days. He was conscious the whole time and alert. It didn't affect at all his alertness, and we were able to communicate with him. It took about 6 weeks before we told him about my mother-in-law's passing, because we didn't want it to have a negative effect during those weeks. But he took it with emunah, with the same faith and the same trust that he displayed throughout his life. Of course, we took it with sadness and with a tremendous sense of loss, but nevertheless, the two things did not mix. He remained a positive person. Some people have suggested that he sort of decided to give up on life once he heard that my mother-in-law was no longer alive, but that really wasn't the case. It's really not if people feel that way, it can be understood, but it's not really the Jewish way, and it wasn't his way. He merited during that 6 months to have 5 great-grandchildren born that he was aware of and was able to kvel. I don't know if I don't have to translate. Shep Nachas, and also two marriages of his grandchildren, which unfortunately wasn't able to be there, but also an engagement of my son Hillel, and any other engagements I'm missing. With the big family, it's things were really. He was able to enjoy the late fruit, as it were, of his life, and lead with a lot of nachas. He also was, at those months, continued to be what he was for many years, a font of a blessing. In our antiseptic world where people speak about quality of life, and once a person's tennis game starts going down, perhaps he's ready for the glue factory, because he doesn't have such good quality of life. And there's terms that sounds really so nice, but it masks a whole different type of an attitude towards life. He didn't have quality of life in any of the senses of the Western sense of the word, but his existence and his endurance, the fact that he remained with us, was very special during those time. And my wife, when I got in December, was able to be with him for 2 weeks, and all of the siblings. There was a tremendous outpouring. I must take my hat off. Well, I'll leave it on, but I must take my hat off to my wife's family, my family. Really, during that whole 6 months, there were hardly any times that he was left alone with that family, besides the wonderful family in Houston and friends, which are basically nephews, aunts, uncles. His own children, spouses and their spouses, and grandchildren, even their spouses, all took turns, and they spent hundreds and hundreds, thousands of dollars going back to Houston to be with him, that he shouldn't be left alone. Because, as I mentioned, he earned it. He earned that type of a dedication from part of his family. There's so much that we can say about him. You know, those who knew my mother-in-law, she was a little larger than life and high energy at most times. So she often took the sort of the limelight. People often didn't, especially in these later years, didn't really know my father-in-law so well. But I would say it's unfair to judge people or evaluate people's lives sometimes by their later years, because you don't know what it was like when they were younger. And I, thank God, over the past 40 years, I'm merited to know a lot about him. And so struck with his so many of the down-to-earth, we call it meat and potatoes, values that he had, and that is the idealism. As a young man, they were tremendously idealistic. I'm sorry, it's not the audio, sorry. Please excuse me. They were, at the age of 14, they met in a Jewish camp called Young Judea, and they were in different cities, but they stayed in touch and very idealistically got married at the age of 18. Both of them were 18. It was unheard of in those times. And also, he worked a little bit for his father, but when their growing family needed a more Jewish environment, and also there was an opportunity in Houston, they moved to Houston, and he took a job as a camp director for the Young Judea movement, his early 20s, which he kept for 10 years. So it was, you can imagine, especially in those years, didn't pay really much of a salary, but it was all about youth, and he was involved. They had many Shabbatons and camps, and that's where my wife grew up, and every summer going to the camps, all the kids did. And that was really a whole part of his life, was reaching out to the next generation. That next generation, of course, are in their late 60s, or if not, whatever, in their 60s now. When we're considering having my father-in-law move to a facility in Houston It's actually one my wife's grandmother had established, which is now called 7 Acres, which is an old age home on 7 acres, much larger than Center Gardens. So we needed to make sure there was room for him, and they would accept his insurance money to be able to. And we went to the CEO, and it turned out to be one of my father-in-law's campers from that time. And he said, "Anything, I'll do anything for him. Just bring him here. When he comes in, there's a space for him forever. There's no way I could pay him back for what he did for us." He has young men from that time who became Moalim. Many other people. We were in Baltimore. People came over from those camp years. It was just amazing. So that was very idealistic. He didn't actually, until he actually needed to get some kind of more of a parnasa. 10 years he held out in that degree. He was straightforward and sincere, capital S, in everything which he did. There wasn't an ounce of insincerity in whatever he did. He was tremendously dependable. That's the word that comes up very often. And he was a klaumensch, which in Yiddish means somebody who feels the responsibility of being contributing to the community. So besides his work in youth director, he also, for 50 years probably, was involved, or more than 50 years. He was honored at the end of 50 years of service to the Chevra Kadisha. And when he joined the Chevra Kadisha, I'm talking about the Chevra Kadisha actually doing the preparations for people who pass away and preparing the body for. He was a man in his 20s, I believe. 29. And I'm sure everybody else that was working there used to refer to him as Sonny, because it was something that only like old people got involved in, and it was quite unusual for a young person to do so. And he served as an officer 50 years, and then in his later years, when he was pretty much retired, he would do shmira, which means somebody passed away, he would go and sit through the night in order that the nifta, the body, shouldn't be without a Jewish presence, and he would read through Tehillim through the night, come home at dawn, and come home, take a quick shower, and be part of the minyan, because he was a minyan man, which means that he was one of the 10 people, which a tradition which he got from his own father. He was also for decades a secretary of the Hebrew Free Loan Fund, like the Rambam Trust here. We didn't even really know about it so much because we didn't know many things about what he did. We just sort of found out more during this whole period. The story which we told about my mother-in-law, he was the partner in terms of the day school, establishment of a day school, not through money, not by giving money, but by blood, sweat, and tears. Then it didn't succeed, and I tried a few years later, and it was successful. And now is a massive organization called the Hebrew Academy, which sits on a campus, I think, about twice as big as Lynxfield. In Texas, everything is big. But at that point, it was the people who actually got it off the ground were my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, and Shalom, to be a source for them. There's a story I'll read soon about the tremendous acts of chesed, but the real type, like driving people places, and the sick people that would come down to Houston for treatments. They would stay for weeks at a time in their house, and then they would need to drive places. They didn't have cars. That was before Uber. It's a BU, right? And he would often just drive them to the hospitals, drive them to the places. He was Mr. Dependable, and there was no shtick at all. He said, yes, I'll drive you. That was it. So also part of the idealism was sending his children away for a Torah education out of Houston when it came to their secondary education. Coming to, and her sister to Beis Yaakov in Denver, and other children to Baltimore, to Ner Yisrael, and others to Memphis, Tennessee, Yeshiva of the South. And that was idealistic, first of all, to do that, in those years, to send your kids away to another city at the age of 13. Chama was 13 when she went away to Denver. And secondly, there was a tremendous financial strain. With all those tuitions, out-of-town tuitions, and plane fares, and all that stuff. But that was it. My mother-in-law went to work as a legal secretary and worked many hours overtime in order to be able to pay for that. The Achnasas Orchim was legend. When I came into the family, I came first for the thing. There were 3 big dining room tables. I went through the dining room and the living room, and that was basically the Shabbos table. It was often up all week long, and because anybody who was, especially some of the elderly people, some of the single people who were in town, they all came, young people coming for Shabbos. I know that one of them is actually Ivan Allender's brother-in-law, who in the 1960s was at Rice University and come for Yom Tov to my in-laws. And my mother-in-law had a custom of setting one extra plate at the table, and that is because my father-in-law would, even after all the guests, he would sometimes bring somebody back from shul, all right? And they were actually, for especially some of the older singles, they were like parents to them. They took care of them for decades and decades. I just want to conclude a little bit over time. I could speak for a long time. We got a very special letter, which I printed up as part of this little booklet, from somebody named Toby Katz. She's married to Michael Katz, who was actually South Africa and used to run the Kola bookshop in Yovel. But she's the daughter of Rabbi Nachman Buhlman Zatzal, and my wife and I were sort of involved in a story that actually has been printed up in a book called Our Mothers, Our Lives, about how my mother-in-law found a baby in a hospital, a Jewish baby that was about to be given up for general adoption the next day, and they went all out with this child. So she writes, "Your childhood home," she's writing to the children, "was the home in which Shimon Yonah had his bris. The day we flew into Houston to get him, it was your father, Alav Shalom, who picked us up at the airport." That was another thing. The airport is about 50 minutes away. How much?
It was the old airport.
The old airport, okay. And it took us straight to the hospital to meet our new son for the first time. After that, he drove us to the lawyer's office to meet the birth parents and make decisions. We were guests in your parents' home for 2 weeks until arrangements could be made for us to take our baby home to Chattanooga, where we then lived. During the first week, it was your father who took us to the hospital every day to spend time with the hospital. He was the one who drove us to our lawyer's office, to court to meet with the judge. He was the one who drove the getaway car when we took our baby home to your parents' home, where we stayed another week. It was Thursday night, and your mother stayed up all night baking while your father made phone calls and invited his friends to the bris. Your parents found a wonderful mohel for us. The bris took place at noon and Erev Shabbos. Your mother was the outgoing one who kept the conversation flowing. Your father was quiet, humble, and kind. I can't count all the many favors he did for us, all his chesed. Together, your parents were the most unbelievable couple, models of goodness and caring. They were heartsick people, Torah-dick people. And then she goes on a little bit more, but they managed to go to Shimon Yona's bar mitzvah, and my mother-in-law managed to fly to his chasana later in Yerushalayim just a few short years ago, and he now learns in Kollel in Eretz Yisrael, and my parents-in-law are buried in Beit Shemesh, and he actually lives in Ramat Beit Shemesh in the hills overlooking their cemetery. In fact, my mother-in-law's funeral, the first person to step forward after the children was Shimon Yonah, because as Toby writes, your parents had 6 wonderful special children and numerous grandchildren and great-grandchildren, Baruch Hashem. Their 7th child was my son, and for that I will always be grateful. So it's actually the story in their story, which is an ongoing story, which the Shloshim continue on, is a story about, it's your story, because it shows that you don't have to be a rabbi or a rebbitzin, and you don't have to be a learned person, and you don't have to be anything. You just have to have the right attitude and the right devotion and the right thing, to do the right thing. And really, within us, we all have the power. They were simple people in many senses, not simple in other senses, but down to earth, salt of the earth people who just knew that there was things to be done in this world, things to achieve for Hashem, and just to wish them both together in Gan Eden, a lichtige Gan Eden, full of light and schus, and may all of the schusim that continue after continue to accrue for them for eternity. Thank you. I really appreciate Chief Rabbi Goldstein coming out tonight in his busy schedule. Not something which any of us take lightly. I actually asked him, in the spruce of my father-in-law, to learn Torah with us, through a Mishnah and Pirkei Avos. I'd just like, first of all, in the presence of many of my congregants, to say how amazing the Sinai and Daba was this year and in past years, and all the different projects, how they have made such a big difference in our lives, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi Kranus, for the warm words of the introduction, as well as the invitation to say a few words on this occasion, which is indeed a special occasion. The Gemara teaches that it's very important to mourn properly